Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today. I'm going to be talking from Western Balkans perspective, which means from the perspective of Southeast European countries that have ambitions to join the EU, but which are not members yet. I'm from Montenegro, but I studied and worked abroad for the last 20 years, and I only came back home last year. I work in the field of material science and applied physics, and I have research experience from both inside the EU and the Western Balkans. So for me, it's not difficult to spot that researchers from the Western Balkan countries have a very different experience of gender equality in academic and research settings than you might find in Western Europe. So for the basic information in this presentation, I mainly use the two publications that you can see on the slide, prepared by the Regional Cooperation Council and the UNDP. They provide a really good, clear overview of the situation in the region and highlight all the points that you can see here. So overall, they prove that the leaky pipeline is present in our region as well. So let's start with the statistics. If we look at the general gender statistic regionally or by country, it's about 50-50 for STEM graduates. And for example, female graduates are double that of men in math in all our countries, or in some cases also in some natural sciences. So however, as the data from Serbia here show, there is clear segregation, for example, in engineering or technology. So there is gap in engineering graduates. But what we don't see here, well, these numbers don't show what happens next. How many women work in STEM fields after their degrees? Do they leave to become stay-at-home moms, or they are all just primary or secondary school teachers in math, physics, or biology? Often we don't have data to be able to answer. So we have seen that at degree level, there is a gender balance in at least some STEM fields, and also among researchers. So we can see here the data are very good. In North Macedonia, almost 50% of the researchers are female researchers in STEM fields. That is higher than the EU average, that is 33.1%. And in all countries of the Western Balkans, this is the case. So it's about 40 to 50%. But what about in academic management positions? Most of the gender structure of academic management in the Western Balkans is not known. There is no data, but the information from Albania is probably indicative of how it works everywhere. So here you can see in this table that up to the level of deputy dean, there is gender parity. But once we get to the dean of the faculty or director of the university, then we find that in almost every case, men are in these positions. That means they are making the financing and hiring decision on research direction, and so on. It's a very male-dominated world. So where does this leaking come from, and how can we change it? Let's look at some specific regional examples of the barriers that women face and what causes them. So these are photos of Montenegrin women and families from the 19th century. Now, throughout history, women in Montenegro have been first a daughter, then a wife, then a mother. And this is a deep mindset that has been how we view things for centuries. The most important and the only possible thing was the family, honor, and the children, especially male children. And things have changed a bit, but to be honest, not much. Montenegro is still largely perceived as a society where men make decisions and women fit in with that. So these photos of modern women very much show how there are roles in work or society for women, but only certain ones. A woman in an office is okay, a woman engineer is not. When I started as an electrical engineer in my first job about 25 years ago, my male boss openly laughed at me and said, "Nobody needs a female engineer." So I decided to quit and went abroad. Of course, what Montenegrin society really seems to want from its women is shown in the third photo, because your best possible project is to be a mother. Just as a quick example, we have 3 universities here. There has been 1 female rector, and she was sacked after her first term in office. So this attitude that women should know their place isn't the only obstacle. There was a case which shook the region this summer, that of the Petnica Science Center. This is a very important institution in Serbia dealing with the development of scientific culture, scientific literacy, education and science promotion. Their activities are mostly focused on young people, pupils and students, as well as on teacher training. And they have a very good record of promoting STEM, including to girls. However, in June, a news story broke about allegations of sexual misconduct and harassment in the center going back years. It's still an ongoing case and hasn't been proved either way, but let's just say that if it did turn out to be true, it wouldn't be surprising because low-level gender bias and sexism is pretty common in a lot of research institutions across the region. So there is that element of gender inequality to consider as well. There are also wider issues of academic integrity that go beyond gender, but which act as barriers to STEM careers in research. One more example, this time from Albania, but to be honest, there are issues everywhere in the region. Plagiarism is a big issue for academia in general at all levels in the Western Balkans, and it gets highlighted when, as was the case in Albania, several high-level political figures were awarded PhDs on the basis of what we might call doubtful theses or research papers. There's also a case in court right now in Montenegro where a university law professor is accused of plagiarizing her own students' work and publishing it without acknowledging him as a co-author. While that's not specifically a gender issue, it shows the attitudes towards things like academic ethics that are common in every country in the region and which contribute to people leaving academia or leaving the region to work abroad. So we know what the problems are. What can we do to support gender balance and gender equality in STEM? Well, let's look at one example of institutional support and one example of something more like a grassroots initiative. First, the institutional approach. We have gender equality plans that are being introduced in the Western Balkans, and this is a response to changes in the requirements of Horizon Europe, where from 2022, every applicant for EU funding must have a gap. So it's being driven by the EU from the outside, but it also forces institutes and universities to address gender equality in a specific way. There are lots of tools to support gap development and implementation, and the one recommended by the EU is the GEAR tool, which is a product of best practices taken from projects on gender inclusion and equality that have been funded from Horizon 2020 and FP7, the previous two European funding frameworks. So that's all positive, but of course, it has to be more than just a plan on a piece of paper. It has to be implemented and led to change on the ground too. So here we can see the mandatory requirements of the GAP, things like everything being approved by the top management and document being publicly available and incorporated into staff training. So now one thing that is a potential worry in the Western Balkans is that it will just be a document on a shelf that is written to tick the box, but not used or taken seriously. So we have to be very aware of monitoring how and when gaps are implemented. And so now what we might call a bottom-up approach to gender equality in STEM. This is the regional network of women in STEM for the Western Balkans, launched this year by the RCC and the UNDP. We want to build a strong community of all researchers that support gender equality in STEM in the Western Balkans. The aims here are to bring together women in STEM careers in academia, industry, and business, to promote the value of women working in STEM fields, and also to act as positive role models for girls and young women, including providing mentoring and training on how to progress in a STEM career. So we need more women with more influence, because that is how we change the culture and the mindset. Our next planning meeting is actually next week here in Montenegro, and we will be looking to identify opportunities to expand the network across the Western Balkans, find areas for us to get involved in and advocate for gender equality, and work out what our strategy is for raising awareness, building capacity, and supporting career opportunities and study opportunities for women in STEM across the region. It's early days, but we are hopeful that this will have a real impact on developing ways to change the culture and change the conversation around STEM subjects. So some quick takeaway points from the Western Balkan perspective. real change can only come if we change our expectations of others and of ourselves. So first, better monitoring of real-world gender equality is needed. This is the idea that we are not just interested in statistics, but also in real-life experience. And in that, we need to look at what really happens and who makes the decisions. Then we need to highlight examples of positive structural change. We need to look at where, how, and why that happens, and what we can learn about what helps create this structural deep-level change in perceptions and attitudes to women in STEM in patriarchal societies like those of the Western Balkans. And finally, we need to look at the regional and international picture and try to adapt and share best practices. The Gender Equality Plan is a good start, but we need to push universities and research institutes to properly implement things. The other thing is more and better networking, for example, the Western Balkan Network, whereby sharing experiences and promoting success stories, we can change more than just the surface numbers. It's going to take time, but we will definitely get there. So thank you very much. I will be happy to take any questions you might have.